Once the twins were safely behind bars, he could persuade the barmaid of the blind beggar to give enough evidence to convict Ronnie of murdering George Cornell. Apart from this, the police still had little to connect the twins with any of their major crimes. It was an uncomfortable gamble Nipper had to take. On the night of the 8th of May, 1968, none of the police from Tintagel House went home. John DeRose and Reed had been there since early afternoon. With them were Superintendent Donald Adams, Superintendent Harry Mooney, and Reed's assistant, Chief Inspector Frank Cater. Soon after dark, fresh police began arriving from the regions, more than 60 of them, all with their cars and two-way radios. Strict security was enforced. Once they had parked their cars, they were conducted to the big main office and locked in. No private telephone calls were allowed. They were warned they would not be getting any sleep that night. Soon after midnight, the main conference began. John DeRose announced that the three Kray brothers and their gang were to be arrested at dawn. Some might be violent, and the police must be prepared. The success or failure of the operation would depend on making sure that everyone on the police list was rounded up at once. In all, there were 26 names to be accounted for. Nipper spoke next, standing on a filing cabinet. 24 separate addresses across London had to be raided. Provided nothing unexpected happened, all the arrests were to be synchronized for 6 a.m. No member of the firm must be allowed to warn another. Once arrested, they would be brought immediately to West End Central Police Station. Index cards with photographs of all the wanted men, along with their addresses and particulars, were distributed among the raiding party. Somebody asked who would be going for the twins. That, explained Nipper Reed, was a privilege he was reserving for himself. The twins were entertaining Kaufman. They started drinking at the Old Horns pub off Bethnal Green Road at 9 p.m. It was a gala night. Ronnie was anxious to show Kaufman the two sides of London, the beery bonhomie of the East End and the bright lights of Mayfair. Kaufman was happy to be back in London. At closing time, as they left their private bar at the Old Horns, none of the firm noticed the courting couple in the back of the car parked opposite. A detective and a policewoman from Tintagel House, hard at work, keeping the twins under observation. But at the Astor Club, Reggie was jumpier than usual. Ronnie calmed him down. Ronnie was happy. It was 5 a.m. before Tintagel House had its report that the twins and the firm had just left and were on their way home. Nipper was armed when they smashed in the door at Braithwaite House 2 hours later and rushed in for the twins. It was not necessary. Both were fast asleep, Reggie with the girl from Walthamstow and Ronnie with his latest fair-haired boy. Reed had the handcuffs on the twins before they had really woken up. His was the first car back to West End Central. Thanks largely to Alan Cooper, there was sufficient evidence about the crossbow and the murder suitcase to keep the twins and all the firm in prison on remand and make sure they came to trial before a magistrate. That was all. The police possessed no proof of murder yet. On the existing evidence, the twins might get 5 years apiece, if the police were lucky. And if they weren't, there was nothing to prevent them repeating their performance at the McCowan trial and once again emerging from the court scot-free. Recognizing this, the police began the last and crucial stage of their investigation. They had a few weeks to persuade the major witnesses to talk. They had to be able to assure them that this time the twins were finished. Otherwise, as one old cockney put it, if people talk to the police and the twins get off again, they'll have to send the plague carts into Bethnal Green and shout, "Bring out your dead." The yard was finally prepared to use its fullest resources, and the investigation had the highest backing. Witnesses were offered round-the-clock protection. The police were set to crack the Kray twins' wall of silence and challenge time-honoured myths of East End villainy, the idea that East Enders never grasped, that there would be a terrible revenge on those that did, and that the police were a common enemy. The twins appeared confident and in high spirits. They were both in Brixton jail, but even here there was a lot they could do. They had more privileges than other prisoners. They wore their own clothes and could have alcohol and cigarettes and food brought in from outside. They both were allowed as many visitors and letters as they wanted. As a result, the two of them maintained something of a court in Brixton. They were celebrities as well as prisoners. The warders treated them with definite respect. Actors and pop singers wrote to them. Boxers and film producers came to visit them. Although the key members of the firm were nearly all in prison too, there were enough old friends visiting Brixton to ensure that their messages were circulated around the East End. One of their strongest cards had been the presence of two of the most powerful members of the firm at liberty. Their young cousin Ronnie Hart and Scotch Ian Barry, who was with Ronnie when Cornell was murdered, had both escaped the 6 a.m. arrests on the 9th of May. Both were considered dangerous, and the knowledge that they were free must have scared many of Nipper Reed's potential witnesses. Hart was the first to go. The police found him hiding miserably with his girlfriend in a caravan. Barry was spotted in the East End, drunk, broke, and lost without the twins. Like Hart, he put up no resistance. With these last members of the firm in jail, the idea of the twins' reprisal force was quietly forgotten. After the twins' arrest, the conmen, club owners, racketeers, who for years had provided their regular income, had prudently been honouring old arrangements. Now they were forgetting them. So were the wealthy businessmen with whom the twins had banked their money for emergencies like this. The vast amounts of money that the twins had taken had been squandered. Nothing was in reserve. The house in Suffolk was made ready to be sold, and then came the ultimate indignity. The twins applied for legal aid for their defence. The trial opened on the 6th of July before the Metropolitan Chief Magistrate at Old Street, Mr. Frank Milton. Legally, the purpose of this preliminary hearing was to discover if there was a case for the twins to answer at a superior court. The court was in a state of siege, with police everywhere. Witnesses were closely guarded and produced in court from secret hideouts. The twins and their supporters were whisked straight from prison in a high-speed convoy, guarded by outriders and an elite task force of police. It was a compliment of a sort to the legend of their power. The twins decided they would waive the traditional ban on reporting from these preliminary hearings. It was a gesture. "We want the world to see the diabolical liberties the law's been taking," Reggie said. They also wanted their publicity. Once the case started, it would soon be clear that they did not have much else. They found themselves up against something they had never faced before: denunciations from their former friends. One of the first was a man called Billy Exley, one-time lightweight boxer, thief, and bodyguard of Ronnie's. His abrupt appearance in court was carefully stage-managed and most dramatic. The twins had no idea that he had turned against them. As far as they knew, Exley had stayed absolutely loyal. Before he appeared in the dock, the prosecution had announced that the next witness was suffering from an acute heart condition. A chair was placed in the witness box along with a microphone. Then in shuffled Exley, looking deathly pale. The twins watched, stony-faced, and in the hush that filled the court, Exley began his evidence on how he used to run their long-firm frauds. But his appearance meant considerably more than what he said about the frauds. He seemed to speak with difficulty. The court was warned he might drop dead at any moment, so that his words seemed like the voice of conscience from the tomb. It was impressive that a man like Exley felt an obligation to recant before he died and name his former friends as evil men. What must have shocked the twins was the thought of all their other secrets he could reveal to the law. Exley knew the truth about Cornell. Exley was the man who stayed on guard at Valence Road armed with a shotgun on the night of the murder. Exley had helped to guard Frank Mitchell. If the police had him on their side, they must already know far more than had seemed possible when the case opened. In the days that followed, forgotten victims, former accomplices, trooped through the witness box. The underworld was talking. From this point on, the twins knew there were no secrets they could count on keeping. Most dangerous of all for them was the surprise appearance of the frightened barmaid from the Blind Beggar. She claimed that the twins had scared her into silence, but in fact she had clearly recognized Ronnie and Ian Barry as the men who fired the shots. Until now, the twins still had a slender chance that the key witnesses might hold back. Now it was clear that the police had all the evidence required to destroy them. Their trial at the Old Bailey started in the new year of 1969 and was to prove the longest, most expensive criminal trial to date in British history. The twins had changed during the 8 months they had spent in Brixton on remand. Both seemed quietly resigned to a long spell in prison, and the twins seemed far more concerned with their lasting reputation than with mere details of defense. This was the moment when they sealed their myth. What they wanted was to be remembered as the great, undefeated heavyweights of crime. The attitude of the police towards the trial was not dissimilar. They wanted it to be a demonstration of the power of the law, a full-scale warning for all future violent gangsters. The first case to be heard consisted of a double murder. The Cornell and the McVitie killings were taken together. Reggie was accused as an accessory to the Cornell crime for knowingly helping Ronnie after his escape. And although Reggie was accused of killing McVitie with his brother's help, there was a group of other alleged accessories with them in the dock. Bender and the Lambrianou brothers, Tony Barry, who was charged with bringing round the gun from the Regency, the twins' brother Charlie Kray, and his friend Frederick Foreman, both of them charged with getting rid of Jack McVitie's body. 2 men were no longer with them. Dixon and Hart had both gone over to the other side and turned Queen's evidence. Both were to be major witnesses for the police. The judge was Mr. Melford Stevenson. The prosecuting counsel, Mr. Kenneth Jones, QC, was not above a certain lumbering theatricality to drive home the full horror of the evidence. Gentlemen of the jury, think for a moment of the horrifying effrontery, the terrifying effrontery of this deed. 2 men can walk into a public house on any evening and there, in cold blood, kill another human being. You may well ask, who within striking distance would be safe? Who would come before the court and have the courage to say who the killers were? Cornell's companions took to their heels. But I will bring before you the barmaid, and she will tell you that she recognizes the killer of George Cornell. The greater the horror and the melodrama, the more it suited Ronnie. Shooting Cornell had been the greatest moment of his life. He felt that he was justified, and here it was being publicly acknowledged. This was almost fame enough. All the defense could do was attack witnesses. Ronnie enjoyed this too, for these were all people that he hated. They had betrayed him. When all the trials ended, 28 criminals had been allowed to save themselves by giving evidence against the twins. Often it was hard to know which was the more nauseating, the crime or the unction of the man denouncing it. What Nipper Reid had told the lawyers at New Scotland Yard more than a year before was proving quite correct. The twins, it seemed, could be condemned only with the help of other criminals' evidence. Such criminals could be shown up for what they were, but their combined evidence could not be totally discredited. The defense was led by John Platts-Mills QC for Ronnie. Paul Wrightson QC appeared for Reggie. Much of their time and energy in court was spent attacking witnesses and impugning the methods of the police, without conspicuous success. The essential facts could not be challenged. Beyond this, there seemed no particular plan of defense, only this endless war of somnolent attrition, with the twins at the center of it, becoming less credible with every day that passed. Ronnie made one unforgettable appearance in the witness box as the case neared its end. His face showed no emotion as he began answering his counsel's questions. His voice was expressionless and flat, and he seemed short of breath. But soon he began to dominate the court. He denied everything alleged against him. He and Cornell were friends. He never even entered the Blind Beggar on the night of the 8th of March, 1966. After the mass of prosecution evidence, there was a calm effrontery about anyone who could lie on such a scale. And it was not done meekly or apologetically, but with an undiminished hatred for all who stood against him. This hatred seemed a sort of pride. After the indignities of his defeat, the betrayals of his followers, he was admitting nothing and regretting nothing. If people said he was a murderer, let them prove it. Under cross-examination by the prosecution, he was crude, sneering, violent. But at the same time, he was trying to present the public self that he aspired to, arrogant and unconcerned, denying everything, friend of the famous, benefactor of the poor, and victim of the police. What made the trial so strange was that the public image of the twins was all that anybody saw or mentioned. There was no real talk of motive, no interest in the minds behind the cardboard monsters who killed Cornell and Jack McVitie. Neither side so much as mentioned the one key fact that ruled their lives, that they were twins. The Kray trial might have been the most fascinating murder trial in history. That it was not was really the twins' own decision. They were the ones who stopped the one defense that could conceivably have shaken the prosecution's case, a defense based upon the nature and responsibility of twins. Only in recent years has the relationship between identical twins been understood. It seems indisputable that Reggie Kray could have built a powerful defense along the lines of diminished responsibility had he chosen to. But this would have meant betraying Ronnie and denouncing him as his evil genius. It would also have meant the end of Ronnie's world, the destruction of the twins, and of the violent dream that has sustained them both since childhood. The court was spared the task of settling responsibility for crimes committed when one disordered mind can dominate two separate bodies. The twins were judged as separate and responsible individuals. This was what everybody wanted, themselves included. And it was as separate and responsible murderers that they were sentenced to life imprisonment by Mr. Justice Melford Stevenson on the 8th of March, 1969. The twins were 34. Their active life was over. Provided the judge's recommendation was respected, they would be 64 before they emerged into the outside world again. Reggie Kray pleaded guilty to helping Frank Mitchell escape, but both the twins were found not guilty of the murder. The remaining charges were kept on the file, and the twins consigned to live in maximum security. DuRose retired. Cooper disappeared. Ronnie Hart attempted to commit suicide. Nipper Reed, after promotion to commander, went back at 46 to Nottingham as Deputy Chief Constable. The twins were parted for 3 years. Reggie started weightlifting and forgot the past. Ronnie began painting, always the same picture of a country landscape with a distant cottage and a tree. He wanted Reggie back. Violet campaigned for this with all her usual energy. Early in 1972, the twins were reunited in the maximum security wing of Parkhurst Jail. The Kray twins are important, not as cheap murderers, but as professionals of violence. And it is their career, and not their downfall, that is significant. The odds against their rise appear to have been enormous. They lacked finesse, and had no education and no knowledge of the world. They were emotionally unstable. Yet they came close to building a true empire of crime in Britain, and did it with extraordinary ease. It is this ease that is disturbing. Any society that lets two Cockney villains get away with what the Kray twins did must be frighteningly vulnerable, and, if nothing else, their rise to power shows just how fragile the whole skin of order is in Britain. They manipulated the establishment and used politicians even to the extent of having questions asked on their behalf in Parliament. More important, they could always stay behind the scenes, organizing other men to do their bidding and ensuring that they themselves were never compromised. One of the lessons of the twins' career is the ease with which they built themselves a position of immunity. Paradoxically, the fact that they were so widely known as organizing gangsters proved an advantage. It added to their reputation, made people fear them more, and even brought them a status as celebrities. Journalists and public figures could be used, certain policemen have their price, trials could be fixed, and prisons infiltrated. The potentiality of power like this was vast. What limited them was not the law, but their incompetence and instability. As criminals, their major defect was lack of seriousness. They proved incapable of exploiting the power they created, and in the end became self-indulgent and erratic, soon bored, and often surprisingly timid. Society was lucky. The twins destroyed themselves. Another time, we may not be so fortunate. Today, in 1994, they are in their early 60s. Old men, as Ronnie used to call any male over the age of 40, and have served 25 years of their recommended 30-year sentence. Ronnie remains in Broadmoor Maximum Security Psychiatric Hospital, where he was sent on being certified insane 16 years ago. On heavy medication, he seems untroubled by the fact that he is unlikely to be released for many years to come, if ever. Reg, on the other hand, is busily preparing for his life of freedom. He exercises vigorously, writes poetry, is a born-again Christian, and is hoping for parole before his time is up. But although they are now apart and living very different lives, one thing distinguishes the twins from the forgotten faces all around them. The fact that as convicted murderers, they are now national celebrities. Even before the film The Krays was made about them, there was a flood of books and articles recounting yet again the saga of the doings and misdoings of the Krays. The details of their crimes have become big business. With books and films and non-stop journalism now produced about them, large amounts of money are involved. From prison they have actually made murder pay. Even if the money has to be held by outside nominees they hope that they can trust. A serious problem since the death in 1984 of the only person they could totally rely on, their mother Violet. They have their fan club, and a pressure group campaigns for Reggie's early release. They have their literary agent, their publishers, and for a period, Reggie engaged a public relations man to boost his image and get him favorable media coverage. While aging Cockney actresses insist that they were really lovely boys at heart, the rich pop star is currently anxious to invest a large amount of money in the sequel to The Krays, which is billed to be even more violent and bloody and profitable than its predecessor. When murderers become celebrities, wrote Salman Rushdie, something has gone seriously wrong. The celebrity status of the twins was only part of the story. They were also very clever and sophisticated criminals who became something which was relatively rare until their appearance on the scene. Homegrown British organising gangsters. As such, they were remarkably successful. Having moved up west from Bethnal Green in the early 60s, 5 years later they were protecting much of the West End gambling in conjunction with the US Mafia. They planned. They made alliances with lesser criminals, and they steadily increased the fear, or as they like to call it, the respect, in which they were held by other villains. They had something which was curiously rare among professional criminals: genuine imagination, great ambition, and a natural instinct for corruption. Stupid they emphatically were not. And anyone who thinks they were should study the way they exploited the aftermath of the Boothby scandal to extract maximum advantage for themselves. It was thanks to this that they achieved what every professional criminal dreams of: effective immunity from the attentions of the Yard, as well as of the mighty British press and the politicians at Westminster. Their model was essentially the US Mafia, with its universal power to corrupt, to deal, and to enforce. They also copied them in the way they made their links with politicians and show business personalities. The business was still growing 6 months before they were arrested. Had they avoided this and been able to consolidate their organization, the Krays would certainly have controlled much of the narcotics business and the financial rackets which were just beginning in the early 70s. They could have become immensely rich. They might have made themselves impregnable. Instead, Ronnie's fantasy life took over, and his private dreams of violence became self-fulfilling. Bored with business, which his twin did so much better, he still hankered after the old East End-style violence, which he had loved and grown up with, but which by now was purest self-indulgence. Like his hero, Gordon of Khartoum, he longed for action, and once he decided he would shoot the utterly unimportant gangster, George Cornell, it was as if the film of Ronnie's life had started. Cornell had insulted him. Cornell was scum. I had to kill him. It was as simple as that, says Ronnie. And the murders started. Talking about the film, The Krays, Ronnie was quite happy to be portrayed as homosexual. There's nothing to be ashamed of. But I don't want to be made to seem a sissy, because I ain't one. Which was true. He wasn't. Reg was realistic. A few nights before he was arrested, he asked me if I thought he could go to fight in Vietnam for the Americans. You're too old, I said. He was 34. He nodded. It's too late anyhow, he answered. And someone has to keep an eye on Ron. They have succeeded in creating certain myths about themselves. The first of these is that during their years of power, they were not so much criminals and gangsters as a sort of East End benevolence society, pledged to protecting orphans, single mothers, and old ladies. The point about the twins' benevolence is that, like all good gangsters, they were generous with their own and great free spenders. The booze flowed freely in their presence, and for the aways, their friends in prison, they would ensure that the families were paid for and protected. But I never heard of them doing any favors for their victims' families, or for ordinary people. The most misleading myth of all is the one that the increasingly violent films about them will perpetuate, as they portray the twins simply as sadistic killers in ever more violent situations. There will undoubtedly be worse to come, with the filmmakers now convinced that the box office appeal of the Kray twins is exclusively confined to blood and violence. The pornography of violence may yet make everybody's fortunes, the twins included. But if it does, it will mean that the real lesson of the Krays has been forgotten. They were clever criminals, who did many more important things than simply murder people. Their true significance was as organizing criminals, and the real lessons that they left were not what they did to Cornell and McVitie, but the vulnerability they revealed in a society that permitted them to build an empire such as theirs. They were not just blood-stained monsters, any more than they were old-style Cockney villains with hearts of gold. They were something much more dangerous. Ronnie Kray was taken from Broadmoor Prison to Wexham Park Hospital, Slough, where he died of a heart attack at 9:07 a.m. on the 17th of March, 1995.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.